Greetings, everyone. This is RDW. I am yours truly, the host of the Human Butterfly Effect podcast, and I welcome all of my listeners today to this very special podcast edition entitled Revolution of Dignity: Why the War in Ukraine Matters. And this podcast is very near and dear to me. I will be speaking with a wonderful person, Diane Freeley of Detroit, Michigan. She is a mentor and someone I consider a friend. We've done a lot of work together, advocacy wise and otherwise. And she recently visited Ukraine. And I don't know about you, but I've never been to Ukraine, nor do I know or am aware of anyone personally in my circle who has visited that country. And so I invited her on the Human Butterfly Effect so we could talk about her recent experiences. And so before I bring her on of this podcast edition, I do want to set the stage as it relates to Ukraine and the war. Now, before we dig into the details, I want to share this quote with you that I found, and it really embodies my personal sentiment about war. We've had a lot of wars in our time and before our time, and there will be other wars after you and I are long gone. But this quote, as like I believe, says the following: There's nothing that war has ever achieved that we could not better achieve without it. And so I think personally that war achieves nothing, at least for those who matter most. Now, when we talk about Ukraine, again, I'm not familiar with the area. Maybe some of you are, geographically speaking, but where is Ukraine as it relates to uh, geography? Well, Ukraine is part of Eastern Europe. And I have a little snippet of a map here. You can see it's kind of between Russia and Romania, and there's some surrounding areas as you can see. So it's over there in Eastern Europe. Obviously, it's not a part of the United States, but just want to give you guys a visual of where it is geographically speaking. Now, there are a lot of different statistics as it relates to the war, and I just kind of want to go over some fast facts about the war. The war began back in February of 2014, so it has been going on over a decade now. Um, Over 6 million people have left. They fled Ukraine for their safety. Over 20,000 soldiers, civilians, animals have been wounded. And that's just the wounded number. That doesn't include casualties. The war is also multi-dimensional. What I mean by that is it's not just about them physically fighting. Yes, they are fighting, but the war has other elements such as propaganda. There is economic pressures, cyber attacks. Some of their infrastructure has been destroyed or um, infiltrated, if you will. And lastly, but certainly not least, there are also terror attacks, and that's on top. I want to be clear, that's on top of um, the actual fighting that's going on. So, to bring it in context, I know we're talking about Ukraine and the war, and I wanted to make it relevant to you. Why is war important, and specifically this war? Well, war is a big business. It's not a big business for us lay folks. But people with money, they make money off of war. That's one of the reasons why war is so popular or the go to strategy to resolve conflict. It's not for the reason that they often tell us. It makes money. And I'm going to give you some examples, such as military supplies. These soldiers, they need weaponry. So they go over here and they fight and they get in these battles. They need a constant supply of weaponry, not only guns, but grenades. They need ammunition, other peripheral that works with the weapons that they use. And so that has to be supplied. There's a cost associated with that. Um, in addition to physical weaponry, there's chemical weapons. There's biological warfare, and there's some other warfare that they use, or weaponry, I should say, that is not um, gun related, if you will. People make that. And when we talk about war being a big business, I want you to also understand or consider the black market. Reconstruction, obviously, in war, things are destroyed, buildings, infrastructure, water, electricity, technology, all of that destroyed and needs to be rebuilt. You have to pay people for that. Which leads me to my next example, contract services. People, private companies employ people that provides these things, not just reconstruction, but logistics, training, maintenance. War is ongoing, so these things constantly needs to be replenished and supplied. Government spending. If you notice, they always pass big budgets. I don't care what country you're in, what war you're fighting. The government who sponsors the war, that's how they increase the military funding. And if you've paid attention, it's billions of dollars. And lastly, but certainly not least, you need supportive services. I mean, people are getting injured. You have humanitarian crisis, not just food, but water, housing. People need daily needs, things to care for themselves, care for their children, their families, their pets, things that are being destroyed or maybe they don't have access to because of the ongoing war. And so those supportive services, again, are supplied by the government agencies, but also private businesses. So war makes money. It generates money that they may not otherwise make, at least in the same capacity. So that leads me to my analysis about war. War, violence, and chaos, they're all intertwined and they all connect us all. You may be thinking Ukraine has nothing to do with what's happening in the United States, but it has everything to do, no matter what side of the fence you are on politically. We have people from Ukraine who have migrated here. They're in our surrounding suburban communities. They have families there, loved ones. So it affects us all. Tragedy touches us all, the future, the present, and past generations. It affects us. It's our history. So it's important. And I do hope that you guys will take a moment and listen to the following podcast. Again, I will be talking to my friend Diane Freeley, and we'll be talking about her recent trip to Ukraine. She'll be sharing some images with us and just talking about some of her experiences about what was going on there, what it was like, what the people was like, and just what she learned and what she felt from that voyage. So again, this is RDW. I am your host of the Human Library Effect podcast, and immediately following my voice, we're going to jump right into that podcast on the revolution of dignity, why the war in Ukraine matters. Greetings, 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 and welcome everyone. You are listening to the Human Butterfly Effect with RDW. and I am yours truly, RDW. And I just want to welcome you all for joining us on today's recording. Today, we're going to be talking about the war in Ukraine. And I have a very special guest, my friend, and I would consider her also a mentor, Diane Freeley. Diane, if you can still hear me, I just need two thumbs up. We're testing our mics here. All right, Diane can still hear me. So Diane is with us today. She's going to discuss with us a little bit about her journey to Ukraine. But before I bring her on, I just want to set the stage. So today's podcast is entitled Revolution of Dignity: Why the War in Ukraine Matters. And I know, especially for people of color, minorities, urban America, we generally don't discuss the war in Ukraine. And that's a general statement. So I'm not trying to say everyone, but in my community, they're not talking about the war in Ukraine. Why that is, I'm going to guess because not knowledgeable or even understand why that would affect people like ourselves back here. So that's why we have, or that's one of the reasons why I invited Diane on, because she recently visited Ukraine and she will be able to share just some of her wisdom, knowledge, and experiences. But before again she gets to talk, and I just again want to talk about what the revolution of dignity actually means. And I'm just giving you guys a little context so you can kind of understand what we're talking about. I do hope that this is a non conversation, because I know that there are um, sensitivities on all sides. But we are here to learn, and hopefully that'll change or affect the way we think about not only the war in Ukraine, but just the war in general. To me, there's never been war has never solved anything. It's a business endeavor. It's a money maker for those at the top. It does nothing to help the working class or impoverished. It really doesn't do anything to resolve issues. It's a smoke screen. It's a performance. Um, but nonetheless, we have wars and people are affected by wars. So the revolution of dignity was really about free trade. When we talk about dignity, we should think about the word respect. That's synonymous with the word dignity. And so the people of Ukraine, they wanted the ability to be able to respectfully earn for their country and themselves. And I mean a living through trade. And so the president at the time, to my understanding, they said no to the free trade agreement, which is what prompted this revolution and was a precursor to the war. So, with that being said, I'm going to bring on Diane. Diane, before you get to speaking, I want to welcome you to our podcast with a friendly round of applause. Let's give her a round of applause, y'all. All right, Diane, thank you for joining us. Can you just introduce yourself to our audience? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your interests in activism, and how you got started, why you're passionate about those.
Well, my name is Diane Freeley. I've lived in Detroit for about 35 years, longer than I've lived anywhere else in my life. I'm a social activist, I'm a socialist, And therefore, I'm for social movements developing and for the kind of dignity and equality that each person should have. That we shouldn't want dominance over ourselves or seek dominance over others. So I happened to be going to Europe for a conference. And I thought, well, what will I do besides go to the conference? And I thought, well, I have followed the war in Ukraine, the invasion of the Russians. I have some Ukrainian friends who were living in the United States and are now back in Ukraine. And so I thought it would be a good time for me to go and visit with them and learn a little bit about Ukraine. I mean, it's a big country and I could only be there for a week, but I went to 3 different cities while I was there and talked to people, and they would talk to me. They were very interested and, I will say, knowledgeable about what was happening in the United States. They really do follow the news. And I arrived just shortly after Zelensky was shown out of the White House. So asking me about Trump was a topic of conversation, especially because I spent a great deal of my time on trains going from one city to another, and therefore talking to, just people who happened to be on the train and asking me about what was happening in the United States. And I must say that people felt sorry for me. They felt sorry for me because I was in Trump land. I thought that was very cute of them. They were under a severe war, and here they were expressing sorrow for me, for my situation now that Trump had taken office and was obviously firing people and ending huge departments that had always had existed in most of the 20th century. So that was amusing to me.
Okay, very good. So I wanted to interject here because I find it interesting that they're in the midst of a war and yet they felt sorry for you. And so I just wanted you to kind of like expound on that. Um, what do you think that says on a deeper level? I mean, because like you said, they're in the middle of a war. Martial law, I believe, you mentioned, was in effect in their country. So they are greatly limited, and yet they felt sorrowful for you. What do you have to say about that, if anything?
Well, they thought it was actually worse than it is, in the sense of they thought that all civil liberties had been canceled. That's not true. We're in a defensive situation. We have a bully for a president, but we can push back against that bully, and we can march in the streets. Um, we can have the right to speak out, although it certainly is shocking to see that graduate student at Tufts University was picked up by these masked gunmen, and when she was shouting, police, police, they said, "We are the police." I mean, that is not something most people associate with the United States. Although, frankly, a lot of what we're going through now, that some people call fascist, I consider similar to the worst days of Jim Crow in the South, when there were lynchings, or in I come from California, and there was tremendous repression against the Chinese in the 19th century. So this is not unique to our society. So here I am on the train, just boarding the train to in Warsaw, Poland, going to Kiev, which was the first leg of my trip. And there are no planes that can land in Ukraine. So you either have to go by train or a private car. And of course, most people go by train. And the trains are very good and they're instantly repaired if there's a problem, because that's a way that people get around. And the workers on the train have done a great deal to make sure that if there's a bombing, that the people are rescued. They built a hospital on one of the trains that's close to the front. So the distances in Ukraine are quite considerable. So I spent a great deal of time on the train. I was on the train for 20 hours in one case, and I slept on the train. And I will tell you that it's great to sleep on the train. They give you blanket. They give you a blanket. They give you sheets, a pillowcase, and a little washcloth so that you can wash yourself. So sleeping on the train was not a problem.
I didn't mean in terms of the people there, I meant in terms of the ongoing war. And you mentioned that you had to travel via train and that it was quite a hike. So were you ever afraid for your safety?
Well, I was told what to do if an alarm went off. I was told to go to the bathroom of my apartment, which had the strongest wall. And interestingly enough, there was a big table in the bathroom so that I could sit there and read or play cards. When I was in Kryvyi Rih, the second town that I went to, there was a missile attack. I vaguely heard it in the middle of the night. I heard the alarm going off, but I didn't wake up. And the next morning, we went to see the hotel that was bombed during that night. And Kryvyi Rih is bombed quite often. And of course, this week you've seen that Kiev itself has been bombed. More than 12 people have died, and I think over 60 people have been injured in attacks in the very capital city that I visited. So it was a concern, but I figured that I would just hang out with the people that I knew and do the best I could. Cathedral in Kiev. It's one of the oldest and very beautiful cathedrals and quite extensive. And the apartment where I stayed was just outside of St. Sophia's walls. And this is the oldest section of the city. And Kiev really became a city in around 700 AD. The whole area of Ukraine was populated by many different peoples. I was surprised, for example, that the Vikings came so far south. The Greeks were among the early settlers, but also the Mongols and the Tatars, and many other empires vied for the land in and around Ukraine, not just the Russian Empire, but the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and the Polish Empire. So there are many different languages that are spoken in Ukraine that are vestiges of the people who who live there. And in fact, Ukraine itself is different than it gained certain territory after World War II. For instance, the third town that I visited, Lviv, used to be a Polish town. And it's a very multi ethnic population. This is downtown Kiev, and it's Maidan Square, where there was a huge confrontation with the president of Ukraine, who wanted to trade more with Russia and move away from the European Union. And so there were huge demonstrations in this whole area. Now you will see all of the Ukrainian flags there to the right. And on each flag is the name of a soldier, an Ukrainian soldier who was killed during this ongoing Russian invasion. So it's a constant memorial to the fact that Ukraine is an invaded country, and people have to participate in guarding against the Russian invasion. While I was in while I was in Kiev, I spoke at a couple of meetings for young people. And I also met with one of the organizers of the Rail Workers Union and talked with him about what is it like for working people under martial law. They're not allowed to go on strike, for example. So if they have problems with the government or with their employer, what do they do? And he explained that, well, they negotiate with the employer. And if the employer does not find a solution to the problem, then they have to work together to have a slowdown so that the employer understands that they really mean serious business. Sometimes that works, not all the time, but that's what they do to try to maintain their working conditions, even under wartime.
So Diane, I I don't know if you can still hear me. If you can I get a thumbs up for the camera here? I don't see. Okay, I see a thumbs up. I wanted to ask you a question. Okay, very good. I wanted to ask you a question about this photo here. Um, what's interesting to me, so let me just chime in or bridge the gap here. I met Diane housing and homelessness, and I met Diane at an event centered or related to that. And so when I look at this picture, it reminds me of how we I know they're in the war, so they have flags, and she mentioned how they have the names of the soldiers on the flags, but it just reminds me of how when we go and advocate for certain things, and I'm looking at the cars that are going down the street, and it's just striking because when we're out there advocating, you know, we're not in the midst of a war, our country here. And so we often see the cars go by and they honk their horns in support or whatnot, or yell out, or some people stop. You know what I'm saying? But it's just striking to me to look at this photo and that they're protesting in the midst of a war, and yet you still have life that appears to be moving along. I mean, look at the those people are going to work or home or school or whatever. What do you say about life and how it's moving in the midst of the war there in Ukraine? Like, how are the people surviving day to day? Are they still going to work, school?
Definitely, they're going to
How
work.
is that? Because to me that's very striking and telling in this photo.
And I would say the different cities have different situations. In Kiev, there are some attacks, drone and missile attacks, so they know that are they are vulnerable. In another city much further to the east, they may not be. But here, they are going to work or coming home from work. One thing that really struck me was as we were walking along, I noticed everybody was out there with their dog. And I said, what is this? Is this a dog culture or something? And my translator said that the psychologist told people that they are under a lot of tension and that this is a traumatic situation and that it would be good to have an animal that they could care for, take care of, love, walk. And so they were all out there with their little dogs out in the street. I know that some people have other kinds of animals or birds, but everyone seems to have taken the advice of the psychologist and tried to deal with their trauma by having an animal around to take care of.
Well, you guys have been listening to the Revolution of Dignity, Why the War in Ukraine Matters. And this is yours truly, RDW. And I just wanted to touch bases with my listeners. And I'm just interested or curious in what you all thought. What did you guys gather from the commentary of our guest, Diane, and what she shared about her visit to Ukraine? I'll tell you a couple of things that stood out to me. First and foremost, it was the heart and the character of the people. Martin Luther King had a quote that said, "The measure of a man is not where they stand in moments of convenience, but where they stand in matters of chaos and controversy." And what better level of chaos or controversy or challenge is there than war? And the fact that these people still had heart. Those weren't the specific words of Diane, but if you listen to her and what she talked about of the Ukrainians and the Polish people and surrounding cultures that were there, if you looked at the imagery that she shared with us, you could see that they were protesting, they were fighting for their liberties in the midst of an ongoing war. Diane mentioned that they were also under martial law, which means that they were restricted. And I don't know the specific restrictions. That I guess that should have been a better question for us to ask Diane. But nonetheless, they're not able to move about freely. And yet, when we looked at the imagery, they were protesting in the midst of a war, but still going on about their daily livelihood. To me, That says everything about the heart and the character of the people. They are resilient, they're hopeful, despite whatever present chaos or controversy. That's why I mentioned that quote about MLK, who we are in matters of pleasure or positivity or promise or prestige or power or prosperity. Who we are in those moments, is that really the essence of who we are? When shit get real, that's when the real you show up. And what's realer than war? And even in the midst of that, she also mentioned how they had empathy. Think about that. They're in the midst of a war. They don't know what will happen from one moment to the next. They don't know when or where the next strike will be. Their lives and the lives of their families and friends and loved ones and people they care about, co-workers, neighbors, they're at risk of every moment of every day. And yet she said they felt sorry for her. I thought that was the most profound thing about what she said. Also, what stood out to me, what was striking, was the imagery, the architecture of that country that still exists in the midst of a war was just it was phenomenal to me. It was beautiful. I mean, can you imagine if we were at war right now here in Michigan and Detroit, yet the Fox Theater still stood tall, or the Majestic Theater, or the Opera House, or Ford Field. I'm just naming some of our historic infrastructure. That's what it was like to me looking at those pictures. Like, you almost forgot the strain and stress that must be amongst all of their people in the midst of that. And yet they were still full of hope and resilience. And yet, another thing that was striking to me was Diane's trip. I mean, here she is, a seasoned individual, and she traveled to the front lines, if you will, metaphorically speaking. And I asked her, was she afraid? I asked her. And, her nonchalantness, about it was, well, yes, I knew there was a war and they told us what to do. And yet she still went there. I think that speaks a lot about her character as well. And lastly, but not least, this is a podcast about learning and growth. And so when you put that in context of your day to day life, your day to day struggle, it should inspire you to become involved. Those people are involved in the midst of their community and their lives are at stake. Why aren't we involved? They're united. Why aren't we united? They're resilient. They're moving in the midst or despite of fear. Why are we paralyzed or stagnated with it? I think there was a lot of lessons to be learned, and it was very interesting to me because, again, I've never been to Ukraine. I probably will never go to Ukraine in my lifetime. So, being able to connect with someone who has been there, who has experienced it, and connected with those people, to me, it was just a very interesting conversation. So, again, this is RDW. I want to thank you guys for joining me on our podcast, and I really hope that you all are enjoying our episodes here. I hope you're learning something. Please feel free to share this with a friend, share this with your network. There's a lot of hoopla and distraction going on in the world, but why not have some pivotal conversations that go to the greater good? Why not learn something? Especially from someone that's been there. A lot of what we hear out here now on the media, the radio, it's just what somebody then told them, what they heard through the grapevine. So to be able to connect with people and um, partake in their experiences, even from a audio or a visual perspective. No, we weren't there with Diane when she went to Ukraine, but we certainly should be able to at least relive some of those experiences she had through, some of her commentary and sharing with us. So, again, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Stay tuned for the next edition of the Human Butterfly Effect with RDW. Bye bye for now.